Welcome to the On Record podcast. This is a podcast where we talk with professionals and subject matter experts from diverse markets that are using video and audio in innovative ways to support their organization's objectives. My name is Mike Anzalone, and my co-host today is Andy Simmons. Today, our guest is Joe Kondras, and Joe is the Associate Director of Learning Environments at Texas Women's University. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here. So, Joe, before we dive into your work with video, could you share a little bit about your professional journey and what led you to your current role at Texas Women's University?
Sure. Well, that'll take me back a little bit. I am here at Texas Women's University approximately 17 to 18 years right now. I actually had a career in higher education in my 30s, and I worked in student life at the time at my alma mater for several years. And during that period of time, I actually got interested into computers. It was right back then in the Windows 95 days. And so I started to become very astute, if you will. You know, computers just came easy to me. And not everybody had a computer back then. So it was a good time to get into the field. And I started stretching my wings into the field of computers and ended up being able to combine that experience of higher education atmosphere and that part of my career with a computing career. And eventually, throughout the years in IT, when I finally got here and I was looking for a position, I felt like I was a unique candidate to be able to combine the understanding of what it's like to work at a university and what the IT needs were of a university staff, faculty, or even a student, because I was a student myself. So I was able to combine those things together and get this fantastic job at Texas Women's University, which I am so grateful for, as I'm actually approaching retirement here in the next few months. So it's been a wonderful career, a great place, and couldn't be more happy than to work in a field that takes something like IT that doesn't necessarily have intrinsic meaning in itself, to being able to take it to something to where I'm now not just doing IT, I'm helping train up the next leaders of the future. And so I love that part of IT and higher ed.
Joe, you have an interesting title, Learning Environments. Can you tell us a little bit about those environments and, how does video fit into those specific environments that you're working in?
Back in the day, we were just called classrooms and labs. The general classroom 1.0, if you will, faculty member up front, a bunch of rows of chairs and students staring at the instructor at the front of the room. But we're so much more, and we do so much more. Students don't just learn in that traditional classroom 1.0 environment. Students learn in multiple places around campus. They can learn outside. If they're working in our butterfly garden, that's part of our botany, thing going on. Or they might be learning in a dental hygiene clinic because they're learning to be hygienists. And we have to have computing equipment, audiovisual equipment in those spaces too. It might be in a laboratory where they're learning how to do research, or they're, learning chemistry or whatever. It's not just, classrooms just seemed limited, if you will, to that visual that we all get, that it's that instructor up front, rows of students staring at the instructor, listening and taking notes and watching whatever's happening on the technology in the room. So we felt that learning environment so much better portrays what is happening truly at our university. We're not just a classroom inside of a traditional classroom. We're educational spaces in diverse types of atmospheres for diverse disciplines.
When did you start to feel that change from like traditional classrooms and labs to kind of the integration of technology throughout the university? So I started college about 20 years ago, and it was very much the way you initially described it. So it must have been somewhere in the last like 2 decades. But when and how did that change kind of happen?
I think probably, I didn't always work in AV and higher educational AV. I more so worked in IT. So I think when I got introduced to audiovisual and, the classroom per se and the technology that is used inside of a classroom, I ran into some faculty that were discovering this thing called an active learning environment or an active learning classroom. It's not that the technology is completely different. It's more the layout of the room. Now it's more collaborative space between student to student, and there's student to student education going on. There's more collaboration going on between students. That faculty member is no longer, there's no back row in an active learning classroom. That's why they call it active learning, because you better be on your game as a student, because that faculty member can walk up to you at any moment. So it was that different type of atmosphere that really interested me and made me think that, okay, the classroom is changing from that version 1 that we all knew. Now the classroom is almost anywhere. And so that was my first debut into another style of learning environment, if you will, or space in which students can learn. And that's, I would say that probably was introduced to me about 10 years ago. And that's when we had our first active learning classroom, and now we have more. But it was later that I discovered, hey, we have all types of different scenarios for discipline specific, whether it be PT or OT or nursing, where we need to have technology in those spaces and embrace those spaces as a learning environment, to where we do whatever we can to enhance the pedagogy of our faculty in those spaces.
And in those spaces, Joe, where do you see video fitting in?
I see video as kind of being a way that we all tend to learn in this century. It's just something that we're used to. I don't know about you, but if I need to fix something or anything really, the first thing I want to do is watch a YouTube video as to how somebody else did it, and then I'm going to go do it myself. And it's the same thing for our students. We all are as a country and probably a world at this point, where we are used to learning with the use of video. Not only can we watch it once, but now we can record and watch it a second time or a third time. With lecture capture software, we are able to have students be able to return to a class where they think, I didn't get that. I didn't get that point of what the faculty member was talking about. So I'm able to go back and review that. And we know that just reinforces a student's learning and improves the learning outcomes of our students. So video has become very important, not just in the classroom for that immediate initial introduction to a point or to whatever subject might be going on, but it's also instrumental for faculty or for students and for faculty, really, because their goal is to have students learn. But it's instrumental for a student to be able to review key points of what they need to know and reinforce for that next, hopefully not just the next test, but that's the first goal, but hopefully permanently.
Sure. I suspect you've been involved with quite a few video implementations across campus. And I believe Texas Women's University has 3 or 4 campuses. Have you been involved with the implementation of video on all of those campuses? And maybe to extend that question, like from a video from an enterprise level perspective, how do you see that fitting in?
Yes. So I wasn't the first person to introduce video onto our campuses. That did exist. First it started with the VHS strapped to a cart with a television on it that was rushed across campus because a faculty member wanted to show some tape in a class. That was a little bit before my time in the field, but I was soon after that. And that's when we were integrating video into classrooms. a lot of that was already accomplished. And I've been that second round of taking it from analog to small to big, to bigger, to wide screens, to digital, to recording systems, to integration into learning environment, learning management systems, into Canvas or Blackboard. I've been a part of that next gen, if you will, of audiovisual in the classroom. And yes, we have 3 campuses. 2 of them are in the medical districts of Dallas and Houston, and they are primarily health science centers. So we have our nursing, PT, and OT students on those campuses, and we currently are in the midst of building a health science center here in Denton, which is the original location of Texas Women's University. So yes, I've been and am currently involved in implementing audiovisual in spaces for learning. I don't know really what else to say about that other than, there's a constant improvement process that we're going through. We avoid fads, if you will. I can't stand to see equipment purchased and then sit in a closet.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know if something's going to be a fad when you buy it? Do you guys have to kind of be more Laggers in terms of when you're buying it versus early adopters? Or how do you know when something comes about, you're like, this seems faddish to me?
I think from experience and seeing what's in the closet to begin with. And when you're at that enterprise level that you are in a place like a state university where I'm at, you rarely are an early adopter purposely. It's not that you're not willing. It's not that you're not aware of what cutting edge is, but you realize that, it's worth waiting to see whether it's going to be beta or VHS, whether it's going to be DisplayPort or HDMI. It's just, it's worth waiting and pausing to see how the dust settles a little bit. I think that technologies usually go through that big generational change, at least in my years, about every 8 years before something, comes out onto the market, before it's like, okay, this is the new standard. Mm-hmm. We are now going from 4x3 screens, letterbox 4x3 screens, to now we are definitely going 16:9 widescreen. It takes some time for that to happen. So we don't always have to early adopt. We can pause for a little bit. We can investigate that new technology. But before you start spending the university's money, in our case, the taxpayers' money and the students' dollars, I'd rather be sure that this is the way that we want to go. Unless it's for some reason would take away from learning. And that rarely is the case.
But what do you mean by that?
The outcome that I'm looking for when I introduce a new technology is this going to improve student learning? Is it going to, are they going to leave here better informed and better educated by the use of this technology? And I have to weigh that against cost and, the practical application of something. I'll throw a technology out there, virtual reality. Virtual reality came out. It was like, whoa, this is really cool. And it is. It's a very cool technology, But okay, we're going to start using in education. Fantastic. That sounds like a great idea. So I paused a little bit and I watched a bunch of people hop on to bringing virtual reality onto their campuses. But it required more than what most people thought. You just don't buy a headset and run. It's not as simple as going to play a game. You need content. Is the content available for the education that you need to do? How is it going to be used? Is every student going to have a headset? Is it going to be used every day, all day? Or is it going to be like a field trip, to where you go down to the virtual reality room once or twice a semester? How well did that affect the student's learning outcome? Well, they might really understand, what it's like to go through, say, a naval vessel from the 1700s and what it looked like back then. They might get a real visual experience because that's what the content that they were viewing happened to be about for a history class. But when it comes to their, how well they can teach history to the next people, or, whatever they might be using that history degree for, it seems to have very little impact in the final outcome of a student's learning. And it wasn't very practical. I mean, most people don't want to wear somebody else's headset. So that wasn't easy. It requires a lot of training to know how to create the scenario and get students ready to go view that. So it's not just something you pull into the classroom. It has to be something where the whole environment, you have a VR lab per se, to where you're bringing in a bunch of students at one time, like I said, a couple times a semester, because there's only one place you can really do this, maybe two on campus. It has special personnel because the faculty member has no idea how to start this scenario up for them to watch this virtual reality experience or have that virtual reality experience. So I'm getting a little off track here, but when it comes to fads and trying to figure out how things are going to work and what you want to go in for and what you don't, it comes, I think, ease of use. If it's not easy to use, it's not going to be used. It's going to end up in a closet. Faculty members want to come in and teach. They don't want to set up technology. They don't want it to be burdensome. They just need to do what they need to do. Cost, what is the cost going to be in ratio to the student outcomes? Mm-hmm. How well are they going to learn? How is this going to improve their education? And that's how I decide when to make that move or if to make that move into a different technology. And of course, the pressing of faculty. Higher education is a relationship. We don't dictate what technology goes into a room. We may suggest, we may ask what you want to accomplish, but we wait for faculty to tell us what they need, and then we try to address it with the technologies that are available.
I wanted to revisit your comment on the cost factor. A lot of our listeners struggle with stakeholder buy-in, particularly for new technology. And how have you successfully advocated video technology investments within your university?
I think it goes back to what we mentioned earlier, and that's partnerships. Faculty don't just come onto campus and teach. There's a whole list of people going on. There's finance and administration, right? There is the academic department. There is facilities maintenance, who actually keep the lights on in these places. So I think that when you can get everybody to agree that we have one main purpose as a place of higher education, and that's to educate students. And then you begin to talk about where does that education happen and how does it happen? It happens in a learning environment of one sort or another. And then you begin to demonstrate the need as to what it's going to cost to keep these learning environments in proper working condition and come up with a plan. You get buy-in. But I can't do it alone. I can't just go say, hey, I need money in order to be able to refresh these classrooms every 7 to 8 years with new technology, with updated technology, with just technology that isn't going to break every other day because it's just aged out. So I've been able to do that, and I have only been able to do that in partnership with other departments. So currently I work pretty tightly with our academic affairs department to get things accomplished. I am part of IT, of course, and I have a relationship with finance and administration folks. So between all of those relationships, discussions can be had. And there's nothing that really pushes things along to when things start breaking. And you're like, look, I told you. This was coming. We're doing all we can. There is no more bubble gum and Band-Aids. We're all out. That shelf of old used equipment that we use as hot swaps, it's gone. But fortunately, some of the things that they need from me in order to be able to do this is a standardization, if you will. so that we can get some type of idea of an annual cost. What is my budget going to be year after year after year in order for me to keep these classrooms up to date and on a regular refresh cycle, so that none of them are rooms where the technology is more than 10 years old and hopefully no more than 8 years old? How do we accomplish that? How much is it going to cost? Because if they have that exact number, knowing, hey, every year we want to add 5% for, price increases. If they have that, then they can budget for it. Finance and administration needs a number, and we have to be the ones to create that number and give it to them. Then they will buy in. Academics needs to know that the technology that they use is going to be easy to use, it's going to be updated, and it's going to work. It's not going to slow them down from doing their job. If we can get them to know that and them to realize that, okay, we need to do this every 7 to 8 years, then we have their buy-in. So making and creating those relationships and giving those people what they need to justify the financial investment into those spaces works. At least it has worked at my university. Mm-hmm. There have been times, though, when the money's just not there. If enrollment goes down, if you happen to have a pandemic, you never know what's going to happen. You just have to be ready and continue to build relationships, I think, is the most important thing I've learned in my career.
Joe, can we talk a little bit, you mentioned it a few times, but can we talk a little bit more about like you and your department's role in measuring student outcomes, right? You said you all have the same goal. We talked a little bit about like purchasing and analyzing technology before you buy it, but how about after it's been implemented? How do you know, and how does the university kind of know if it was a good investment based off of like what you'd want to see students actually accomplish?
I'll be honest with you. I don't typically measure student outcomes. I'm not doing that. That kind of goes beyond my skill set and my resources to be doing deep research into student outcomes. So I rely on the proven outcomes of the manufacturer. Take lecture capture. Where you're in a room where you're recording that lecture, and that is then made available to the students after the fact. We can look at how much and how often a video is watched, how often it's used, but I don't necessarily see a student's grades. But the manufacturer of these devices and software systems, they do, and they have done the research. And so the research is out there. And it's not just from one, of course, somebody's going to say, yes, this is my Amazon review. I've got 4.7 stars. So it's not like that. We don't just trust that, but it's across the industry alone that it's known that lecture capture improves student learning. So I can feel confident in that, and I can go with that. You can also look at the adoption of it, though. Even though it's going to improve student learning, it doesn't mean a faculty member is going to use it.
That's what I was kind of wondering. It's more of like, is there a feedback loop within the university of, we help you implement this? Like, did it get adopted?
I wouldn't say that there is a formal feedback loop, but we know when something's being used and when it's not. Because, I can look at the licensing that I have to do every year for the product, and I can see, I review how many hours it's being used. I know when the price is going to go up because we're using it, like crazy, or it's going to go down because we're not using it as much as we expected. So I can watch it that way. So it really usually comes from annual licensing that I can see what's happening or not happening. And there are plenty of times where I trim technology in a classroom. This year, in fact, I'll go last year and the year before that. And really, since the pandemic, students got their own devices. We used to have a certain amount of students that had their own devices, a certain percentage. But since we all went home and started teaching and learning from home for a period of time, everybody ended up getting their own device in one form or another. Not everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, that's too all-inclusive, but the great majority of people have their own devices. I watched one of my learning environments, which we called the Mega Lab, which had 85 computers in it. I watched the usage of that space just dwindle and dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. And, I can get stats on computer usage. So our usage, on average, there were 2 students at a time logged in the Mega Lab with 85 computers. But the other thing that I could see, which I couldn't get stats on, but I could see with my own eyes, if you will, so a qualitative type of analysis was I have students sitting all over the floors outside of the Mega Lab with their laptops or in groups, collaborating on something with their own devices. They didn't want our devices. They have their own. They just need space now. They need space where they can sit and talk. So we end up taking half of the computers out of this space, change the furniture to where, 6 or 7 students could sit around a table. We put in chargers, and we took out anything that was dividing a student from looking at another student and conversing, where we had dividers. We created more BYOD spaces, bring your own device spaces, to where a student could work by themselves as they wanted to, and they just had, plugs for their chargers, and, they could be alone, if you will, or segregated to themselves to do their self-study. And that Mega Lab became alive again. It was just packed between like 7 and 8 a.m. and then between 11 and 1 in the afternoon, sort of like those off class times. Place was packed. So it was actually removing technology from the space that improved the learning that was happening in those spaces. And a lot more peer-to-peer learning, which is really cool to see. So there is a time to remove technology too.
Do you tend to feel those things coming? Like you said, you saw students sitting around. Like, do you tend to see those? How do I really say this? Maybe 10 years ago, did you feel like maybe that was going to happen? Like these labs might be a thing of the past soon enough?
Yes. So it was prior to then that we started putting in more BYOD furniture around the building, around in our buildings in all kinds of different spaces with charging stations. But while I saw that growing, I didn't necessarily foresee the decline of the use of the technology that was there. I only saw that we needed to give them more space to use their own technology. And, we had to add stuff like print from your own device rather than just having to be relegated to printing from a computer lab computer. Now we added that service to where you could print to the cloud and go to any place on campus and print out what you worked on from home or from your own device. So, so we were making some of this change as time went on, but it really came to a head in these last few years to where it was like, okay, these spaces aren't being used. They're abandoned. We need to make a change. We need to adapt for our students. And that's what we did. And we do the same thing inside the classroom, not just in, the computer labs, if you will.
Hey, Joe, before we wrap up, can you provide guidance to our listeners who are thinking about using video?
Yeah, video in the classroom, to me, as I said earlier, is pretty much one of the key learning instruments that all of us use, whether it's personal or whether it's academic. So to try to live without it nowadays is, you might as well go to an island. It's just part of our everyday lifestyles now, and it's in everything. I would highly suggest that one of the things that we have been moving more and more to is from training documentation to training videos. Somebody nobody, especially a faculty member who's trying to get a class started, nobody wants to be reading a document on how to use the technology in a classroom. But if you provide them a 1.5 minute video that they can watch when they know, hey, I'm going to be in building such and such in room such and such next semester, I at least want to take a quick look at this room, and I can look at it on video. I can see the technology that's in there. That's fantastic. And that's video and training videos for the faculty member. So now inside the classroom, it has the same effect on behalf of the faculty member. As long as they can get in there and it's easy to use, first of all, the students are going to love it. They're going to appreciate it. It keeps their attention. It's what they're used to. But that technology needs to have an ease of use. It needs to be able to be used easily and quickly. And if it's not, if it takes away from the faculty member's ability to teach rather than be an asset in their portfolio and in their pedagogy, then it's just a lose. It's just lost. It's an investment that is just going to sit there and not be used.
Great. By the way, your using video for training is right up of Andy's alley. He does quite a bit of educational videos. And maybe you can talk about that for a second, Andy, like how useful that has been for users of video systems.
I think you're right. If you look at companies like ours or any sort of software company, you could have a 500-page user manual, or you could quickly find the minute-and-a-half video you're looking for. People will, search YouTube before they go to your website to find your user manual. So everything you said has kind of been spot on with my experience, although mine's not in higher education.
Yeah, and mine is higher education, but I don't think it really makes a difference. Like you said, it's just how we learn as human beings nowadays. It's one of the main ways that we're going to learn. Not that anybody in the podcast wants to hear this, but Andy, if you check out tw.edu/classrooms, you'll see a link that says tw.edu/classrooms. You'll see links there where you can actually view the technology in our room and actually look at our training videos. So we have a ton of training videos. We're making more every day or every year. Makes a big difference in the adoption of our faculty. And they can walk in there ahead of time and feel confident in the space rather than feel like, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm about to face.
So I have a question for you. Now kind of like on the tail end of your career, you mentioned like what you inherited when you first got into this field, like TVs and VCRs on carts. If you could like kind of predict the next maybe like 5-10 years, like where this kind of goes, what do you think your successors what types of problems will they try to be tackling?
Well, just for clarification, I want to make sure I'm honest here in case my predecessors are watching or listening. Actually, they did the TVs and VCRs on carts. I was part of that
That's right. You said
next generation of taking it from 4:3 to 16:9, widescreen, and from analog to digital. But the next hurdle I think universities have to accomplish as they try to figure out the cost of higher education. Just the way life is nowadays is that we have to find a way to make the in-classroom student and the learn from home or distance ed student feel that they're on the same level. Classrooms are now a very hybrid atmosphere. Our faculty are teaching not only classrooms, students sitting in front of them, but they are teaching students who are online via Zoom, via Teams, via Google Meets, whatever, Hangouts. There are different means by which we are communicating. They're paying the same dollar, but do they feel like they're getting the same education? Do they feel that they're on the same footing? And I think as technologists, we have to find a way to figure out where we equate or bring equality between the student who isn't in the classroom, but rather is learning whenever and wherever they are at that time. It takes a lot of money to keep a building or a campus going. And so we need to increase our enrollment numbers. If we increase our enrollment numbers, it's not necessarily going to be because we've increased on campus student population, but we may have just brought in more students from outside of the campus into our classrooms virtually, remotely through the use of technology. But how does that student remotely and that student in person feel like they're getting the exact same quality education? I think we've all experienced that conference room to where you have a dozen people sitting around a conference table and they're having a meeting, but the 3 people that weren't able to be on site and are connected remotely are on a big screen at the end of that table. And that meeting is happening, and everybody who's at that table, in person, are having one experience, where the people who are remote and connecting to that meeting are seeing the backs of people's heads, are hearing muffled conversations because 12 people are talking at the same time, and that happens with our students too, that are connected remotely. And we need to find a way to bridge that gap.
Well, Joe, this has been an awesome conversation. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot as well. Any last comments you'd like to share before we say goodbye?
I think that one recommendation that I would have, especially at the end of my career now, and this probably goes for any field, but I know it especially goes for higher education, is if you want to get something done, build relationships. A university is multifaceted, as we talked about earlier. It's not just academics. It's not just finance. It's not just IT. It's not just facilities. It's all of us making this thing happen together. It's also vendors and manufacturers of the products that we use. And for me, it's relationships that make the difference in how productive you can be and how successful that you'll be in your role. So if I would encourage anything, it's get to know the people that you're working with, and so that you can together produce the outcomes of that next great successful leader that we're all invested in.
On Record is a podcast presented by Intelligent Video Solutions, hosted by Mike Anzalone and Andy Simmons, and produced by Kyle Shellstad. Find us online at ipivs.com/onrecord and on social media at Intelligent Video Solutions.